This is the P303 Music Vlog. I have a very special guest, the legendary Jesse Saunders. For those of you who don't know, and you should, Jesse Saunders is known as the originator of house music.
Who doesn't know? Google it. No.
Yeah, Google it. Your track On and On was the first house song to be recorded and actually printed on 12-inch vinyl. Is that correct?
That's the story as I know it. I mean, you know, it's funny. He just had a thread on Facebook on Maurice Joshua's page. Well, Maurice is he's a Grammy Award winner for a Beyonce remix he did a few years ago in the remix category. But at any rate, he's one of the pioneers of Chicago house music as well. And he put on a thread that basically asked who made the first house record, or who's the godfather. I forget exactly what the original question was, but the thread now is over 1,000 comments long. And you got people chiming in from all over the world, all different things. It's the most amazing thing I had ever seen. And it starts out being everybody trying to, say that Frankie Knuckles is, and this and that. And some people even said Larry Levine and this and that. And then, but it comes down to, finally, when it gets on track, it's like, they're like, well, as much of a contribution as Frankie Knuckles in particular made to it, he really shouldn't be labeled the godfather of house, because he didn't, make house records. He remixed some, but he didn't make house records in the beginning. And then it starts moving on, and it's like Larry Levine, he did re-edits and remixes of disco records, so he doesn't count. And finally, it got to the point where it's like, well, Jesse did this and that and blah, blah, blah. He had the first record on vinyl. And so finally the whole thread ends up like, okay, yeah, you're right. And I'm sitting there thinking like, this is a great cross-section, a great picture of like what the dilemma has been for the last 27 years about what actually constitutes the world's first house record. And it's like, it's really good to see that people finally get it. It's like all my soapbox standing and shouting hasn't been in vain.
And some might say that Madonna's track Vogue brought house to the mainstream. But if you go back further to Funk You Up, you'll see that track was number 1 in major Midwest markets, such as Chicago's WBMX, WGCI.
That's right. TLC in Indianapolis, JLB, Detroit. I mean, the list goes on and on. Yeah.
And it even made Billboard's top 25.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be most likely considered the first crossover house music track.
It was definitely the first house record on the radio. And I'll say that actually got into, really becoming a cross-section in Midwest radio, top 10 across the board. So yeah, from that perspective. But honestly, the funniest thing about that was On and On was actually the first record on the radio. And I don't know how it got on the radio. I don't know how it got charted. I don't know how it ended up being that, because basically what people would play with were the B-side tracks on it, but they would play it in regular rotation. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life.
So I was unaware of that. I thought Funk You Up was the first house track on the radio.
No, it was the first one to get into regular rotation on a major radio station. Now, On and On was more so like, it was on like a lot of college stations and a lot of small market stations, things like that. But Funk You Up was the first one, which was, obviously actually a song, and made it into the real charts and got into heavy rotation and charted like that. It was really amazing to me that, it even happened like that with On and On, because that record was really meant for DJs to just kind of play in clubs. It wasn't anything that we even geared or targeted towards radio. It just happened that way.
I personally feel that if a track is good, it's going to cross over. Eventually, someone will pick up on it, and it'll either end up on the radio or in a television commercial or some other non-underground or non-club venue.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is, I think that because of On and On being the first and being out there and being supported the way it was, I think that's what really enabled and helped Funk You Up to be as big as it was. Because I don't know if Funk You Up would have gone on the radio, not to say that it wasn't good enough, because obviously it held its own once it got there, but I don't know if Funk You Up would have been able to do what it did had there not been an On and On. Yeah, because I remember when we had our radio people, and one of the most amazing things, which shows you how the music and the record business has evolved, one of the most amazing things that happened when Funk You Up came out was that you had the major label reps, the regional, promotion people from RCA, you had MCA, which, is Universal now, but back then it was MCA Records. You had those kind of people, plus my independent guys, working Funk You Up to get it on the radio. And here it is, we're like just a little small independent Jesse record company operated out of my grandmother's basement and everything. But yet we had captured the whole, feel from everybody. I mean, everyone was looking to see what this sound was, what was going on, why was it totally different than anything else that was being put out there that was marketed towards radio and trying to get on the radio. And they all bought into it and they all helped. So I mean, back in those days, I can really say I appreciate, all of the people who helped do what they did for house music. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't know. I mean, especially they don't know that story, because I don't even think I've ever told the story that way. But as we're sitting here talking about it, and I really think back on the origins of how it all started and how Funk You Up got where it was, that was A, due to On and On breaking the initial ground, and B, everybody within the music industry out there pushing to make this happen. I mean, Chicago, back in those days, that's all Chicago was house music once we got that started,
It's great to hear it from your perspective, because, as you said, Facebook threads and, blog postings and things all over the internet, it's nice to hear it from the source, someone who was there.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the whole thing about it. It's like, I see and I hear all of these different people saying this and saying that, and they did this and they were that, and no, house music didn't come from here, and the term came from there. And it's like, most of the people that are sitting up talking about it and trying to prove their point weren't even there when it started. And it's the most amazing thing to me to see people who really don't have a clue. They're getting their information from somewhere and someone else, which generally is maybe 50% right if they're lucky. But yet they're taking it as if it's the gospel and they know it for a fact. And I just sit there and laugh half the time. It's like, you weren't even there. How do you know?
That's interesting you bring that point up, the term house. Exactly where did that come from? Because there's so many stories going around.
House, I mean, it's really quite obvious, and that's why it dumbfounds me as to how all of these different definitions come about. But it came from taking, house from warehouse and calling it house music. That's where it came from. But the origin of what people think, they think it's because Frankie was making house records and things like that, and he has it had absolutely nothing to do with that. What it had to do with were some high school kids who used to go down there, couldn't get in originally, and used to sit outside the warehouse, which I was one of them. And the music, and the bass was so loud and everything, you could hear it as well outside as you could inside. So we'd all just sit out there all night. And people used to just call it house music instead of saying warehouse music. But I've heard all kinds of definitions. Oh, it was music that was played at your house, and we needed a term to describe it at a record store, so we started calling it house. It's like, one of the things, and I hate to call Chip E out, but he seems to be at the forefront of all of these things, because he keeps trying to make his point about how he says that I didn't want to be house. I wanted to be pop R&B artist, which is true to a degree, but that had absolutely nothing to do with the origin of what is house music. I mean, whether I wanted to call it house or not, it still is house music. You know what I mean? And that's where he's getting, in all these semantics, he's getting everything all mixed up, because he was a kid that lived down the street that, he's a couple of years younger. And when I was, we were in the basement, my band would practice there, we ran the label out of there, the whole 9 yards. He would come down there every once in a while because Vince brought him.
That's Vince Lawrence, correct?
Yeah, Vince Lawrence. I don't remember him personally, but Vince, claims that he brought him down there, and he claims that he was there. So I'm like, okay, fine. He was there. And, he would listen, and check out what we were doing. And he didn't do anything or try to make any type of recording or release anything for another year and a half or so after the fact. So the thing that I just don't get about that is if like you were down there and you didn't know what was going on, and then you want to claim, you know, a year or two later that you came up with the term house music because you worked at imports, etc., and you had to have a term to classify what the new music was that people were trying to buy. It's like that doesn't even make any sense. You weren't even old enough to go to the warehouse either. So I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like a lot of this stuff just doesn't make sense, and you get a lot of that from a lot of people. And the only reason why I singled that particular one out is, like I said, is because through his documentary and through the stuff that he posts and his interviews that he do, he always claims that that's how and where the term house music came from. But that's just another one of those things. It's just like you weren't there. How do you even know where the term came from yourself?
Interesting insight. Okay, moving forward, Jesse has a new release. It's a compilation called Old Skool New Skool Volume 2. Jesse, would you care to give us a little bit of background and insight on this compilation?
Well, most definitely, because that's actually a great segue from what we were just talking about. I mean, what Old Skool New Skool, the whole concept of that actually originates from those original days, those origins, the beginning of things. It's like, it's evolved. House music has evolved, but then it really hasn't, if you really look at it. You know what I mean? It's evolved from a technological standpoint, but house is still the same thing as it was, 27, 28 years ago. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of the sounds that you hear, you'll still hear some similar sounds, and even newer, productions from younger producers and things like that. It used to be that they would sample them. Nowadays, they just come up with the sounds on their own, because one of the things that I do, like with my label Broken Records that I have now, which is actually a second generation label from Jesse. I just kind of decided that Jesse was so special that it should just stay what it was, with what it started with the classics and whatnot. And I just picked up in the 90s, I picked up the moniker Broken Records.